It is the night before Halloween, 1938. Millions of people across the country are tuning into CBS, expecting to hear a weekly music program.
A bulletin is handed me. Martian cylinders are falling all over the country.
It is a radio drama unlike anything that has ever been broadcast before. Today, we know this is Orson Welles and the actors of his Mercury Theater Company dramatizing War of the Worlds, a work of science fiction by H.G. Wells. But in 1938, the possibility that invaders from Mars are actually attacking the Earth is demonstration of our willingness to embrace the possibility of life on other planets. It is a desire that resonates deep in the human psyche. Because for as long as humankind has looked at the night sky, we have wondered, is anyone out there? The earthly landscape may have changed dramatically since the dawn of man, but one thing has never changed. We see the same sky, the same stars as our most ancient ancestors, and from the very beginning we have tried to put a superhuman face on the cosmos.
Everybody's curious about whether we're alone or not. I mean, everybody stood out late at night looking at the stars and sort of wondered, well, is there somebody up there looking back this way?
In ancient Egypt, it is Ra, the sun god. The ancient Greeks populate the sky with hundreds of gods and goddesses whom they describe in their literature as beings beyond Earth, and they give the constellations names and human forms. Sagittarius, the archer, Orion, the hunter, Hercules, the hero. Then there is that enormous white ball in the sky which seems to be exerting a powerful force on Earth. It affects the tides, crop planting, and even our emotions. This, too, we anthropomorphize. It is the man in the moon. And there are indications that as early as 2,000 years ago, we are trying to communicate with them. High atop the Peruvian plains are enormous pictographs some more than 2 miles across that can only be seen from the air. And yet the Nazca lines, as they are called, are created by an ancient people for whom the possibility of human flight does not exist even as an idea. Could this be Earth's first greeting card to extraterrestrials? Then, in the 16th century, the invention of the telescope changes everything. And nothing. Fact is merging with myth and superstition, but the infant science of astronomy only deepens the belief that we are not alone. And leading the charge is Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus.
Copernicus, way back in the 16th century, is the one who put the sun in the center instead of the Earth. So instead of having the geocentric worldview, you have the heliocentric worldview. What that means in terms of the extraterrestrial life concept is that the Earth now becomes just another planet, and the planets potentially become Earths. And so the question is, how much are those other planets like the Earth?
The question is answered first in literature and painting. These are the earliest works of what will one day be called science fiction. And as the dreamers interpret the cosmos through their art, scientists are searching the skies with bigger lenses and better calculations. By 1850, we have found 5 planets, observed sunspots, and found a moon orbiting Mars. Then, in 1877, Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli peers through his looking glass and observes something that will astonish and inspire the world.
Then he claimed there were these straight lines lacing the surface of Mars, which he called canali, which was translated into English as canals, not a perfect translation. But in any case, stimulated a lot of thought that there might not only be cosmic company, but it might be very nearby, just 35 million miles away on the red planet.
But even the mere possibility is enough to spark the imaginations of scientists and dreamers around the world. In 1865, Frenchman Jules Verne publishes From the Earth to the Moon, foreshadowing what will become a reality a century later. Verne's early space travelers are shot into space from a large cannon on the Florida coast. And at the turn of the 20th century, H.G. Wells writes his novel, First Men in the Moon, about early astronauts who meet up with a sophisticated race of insect-like creatures. In 1902, French director Georges Méliès inaugurates the genre of science fiction movie making with the 16-minute film Le Voyage de la Lune. His space creatures are approximately humanoid with chicken-like heads and lobster-like claws. And while writers and movie directors are imagining life on other planets, an astronomer in the United States thinks he is close to proving it. His name is Percival Lowell.
A lot of astronomers doubted his findings because he wasn't trained in astronomy at a university. He was trained in mathematics. I think what he probably thought was, you haven't seen what I've seen. I have the evidence. Come and look through my telescope.
Percival Lowell had been fascinated with astronomy since boyhood, but it was never more than a hobby. By 1893, he is a wealthy entrepreneur in Boston, Massachusetts. Then, Lowell reads an article about Schiaparelli's so-called Martian canals, and his life changes forever. He puts his business interests on hold to devote himself full-time to astronomy. He begins to study the Red Planet, and then in 1895, Lowell publishes his earliest findings in Mars, a book that becomes very popular.
Certainly, we see hints of the existence of beings who are in advance of us, not behind us, in the journey of life. Startling as the outcome of these observations may appear at first, in truth, there's nothing startling about it.
In 1896, Lowell builds his own observatory in the highest, darkest place he can drag a 26-inch telescope, Flagstaff, Arizona. While cowboys are riding the range in the Wild West, Percival Lowell is looking for life on Mars. When we continue, what Percival Lowell finds on Mars will inspire others to try and make contact. And in at least one case, it seems they may have. In the late 19th century, mogul-turned astronomer Percival Lowell is nationally known because of his startling revelations that he has observed artificial structures on the planet Mars.
Not everybody can see these delicate features at first sight, and to perceive their more minute details takes a trained as well as an acute eye. These are the Martian canals.
Lowell speculates that the canals were built by Martians to carry water from the melting polar ice caps to the Martian equator.
The theory of the canals being made by intelligent beings was not accepted by most of the scientific community, and for many years he was in fact ridiculed.
So Lowell spends thousands of hours in his observatory painstakingly drawing sketches of what he sees in his telescope. He transfers those sketches onto maps and then Martian globes.
There are several things in the archives. There are all of his working papers and all of his manuscripts. The maps, the globes, those kinds of things that we have, they're a true treasure, as this observatory is a treasure, and I think we have to treat it as that.
And it is during the Lowell era that other scientists are inspired to take alien hunting in a whole new direction. If we can see them, the scientists muse, maybe they can see us. At the turn of the 19th century, mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss proposes planting broad bands of wheat in the Siberian forest to form a vast right-angled triangle as an unmistakable sign of earthly intelligence that could be seen from space. Austrian astronomer Joseph von Lüttrow suggests a scheme to dig a series of mile-long canals in the Sahara Desert and then set them on fire to signal to our Martian cousins. In France, scientist Charles Cros urges his government to build a gigantic mirror to reflect sunlight towards Mars. But the biggest ideas are still coming out of America. The recent discovery of radio waves in 1887 was transforming all branches of science. And the idea that something or someone out there could receive our messages or send one of their own meant we now had the possibility of communicating with other worlds. This was the dream of Nikola Tesla, a Serbian-born American physicist and engineer.
Tesla was doing experiments out in Colorado Springs around 1899, and it was in the course of those experiments that he believed that he had actually detected a signal. He didn't publish anything on this until 1901 because he realized it would be very controversial, but he did publish a little article in 1901 called Talking with the Planets, and he predicted in there that this would be one of the major themes of the 20th century.
In 1901, Tesla writes,
"The disturbances I'd observed might be due to an intelligent control. The feeling is constantly growing on me that I had been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another."
Tesla's announcement is widely reported, but in academic circles, the idea of radio communication with outer space is greeted with almost unanimous skepticism, even ridicule. It would be another 2 decades before the idea of interplanetary communication is revived by another radio pioneer, Guglielmo Marconi.
Marconi, as early as 1919, believed that he had made a detection, again by radio, from Mars, and this was played out in the pages of the New York Times during 1919 and the early 1920s.
We have not the slightest proof of their origin. They are sounds. They may be signals. We do not know.
Marconi himself eventually lost interest in that, and it sort of remained a mystery what these dots and dashes were that were received by Marconi. Others, carried forward with the idea that there might be something to it.
One of those others is astronomer David Todd. His specialty had been solar eclipses, but in the 1920s, Todd also becomes fascinated with the possibility that Martians might be communicating with Earth via radio waves.
Todd already in 1909 had the idea that you might take a balloon flight up above some of the atmosphere and use radio apparatus there to try to detect a signal from Mars.
David Todd thought that by putting sensitive wireless telegraph receivers aloft and away from any obstructions in the atmosphere, signals to and from Mars would come in a whole lot better. On August 29th and 30th, 1924, Mars is at its closest point to Earth, optimal conditions for communicating with the red planet, Todd believes. He asks the U.S. military to shut down all radio transmissions in the Washington, D.C. area for a short amount of time. Amazingly, they comply. The Chief of Naval Operations sends a dispatch to the radio facilities under his command, telling them to avoid any unnecessary communications and to listen for any unusual signals. After Todd switches on his radio gear, several strange signals are in fact detected at several sites. But the most unusual phenomenon occurs because of an invention by another scientist who is with Todd. C. Francis Jenkins had invented an early version of television called the Radio Photo Message Continuous Transmission Machine. During Todd's experiment, Jenkins records what is described as a curious picturization of radio phenomenon.
What came out in the picture was something that looked like a face, and Jenkins was more conservative than Todd. Jenkins said that he really believed that this was not something related to Mars, but Todd, always pressing forward sort of in a Llewellyn kind of a way, said that maybe it could be.
We now have a permanent record which can be studied, and who knows until we've studied it just what the signals may have been. But the important thing is to have a record.
The picturization is 30 feet long and 6 inches wide. Some see the profile of a man. Others the possibility that this is a Martian code that the aliens are hoping we Earthlings can decipher. Half the film is turned over for analysis to William Friedman, the U.S. Army's chief of cryptography, who was world-renowned for cracking a number of German codes during World War I. If there was a message in this signal, Friedman died without deciphering it. The film was found in his private papers following his death. The man who had solved so many code riddles apparently never stopped puzzling over this one.